Good morning and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to the fifth meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This committee has oversight responsibility for education, health, gender, tourism, public administration, labor, culture, community development, and other social services. This is the committee's third public hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its inquiry into the effectiveness of sporting programs in diverting vulnerable youths from delinquency and criminal activity. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments on the Parliament's social media platforms, our YouTube channel ParlView, ParlView, or via Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at TT Committees for real-time updates and highlights from committee meetings. I'd just like to remind participants that this is a virtual meeting and certain specific guidelines would apply, including making sure your mute is on your microphone when you are not speaking to help keep background noise to a minimum. Microphones muted. Adjust your camera so that your face is clearly visible, and ensure that notifications from your cell phone and other electronic devices in your vicinity are muted during the course of the meeting. I would now like to ask the representatives present from the Tobago House of Assembly, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, the Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center, the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists, and the University of the West Indies to kindly introduce yourselves in that order, if possible, starting with the Tobago House of Assembly.
Madam Chair, good morning. I am Mrs. Toby Koch, the Chief Administrator of the Tobago House of Assembly. The other members of the team will introduce themselves.
Madam Chair, good morning. My name is Sean Aberdeen. I'm the Technical Sport Director.
Good morning. My name is Derek Dickinson. I'm the Project Manager responsible for regional recreational facilities.
Good morning. I'm Anne-Marie Degazo. I'm Policy Director, Strategic Performance Management Office.
The University of Trinidad and Tobago.
Pleasant morning all. My name is Dr. Kerry Dolloway. I'm the Program Leader for the Center for Kinesiology, Physical Education and Sport.
Good morning, Chair and colleagues. My name is Atu Rockcliffe, Assistant Professor in the Center for Kinesiology, Physical Education and Sport.
Thank you. The Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center next.
Good morning, Madam Chair and the committee. I am Carlos Craspi, the Acting Commissioner of Prisons, and I have my colleagues who will introduce themselves as well.
Good morning, Madam Chair and the rest of the members of the committee. I'm Dr. Wendell Lewis. I'm the Superintendent at the Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center.
Good morning, Madam Chair and the rest of the committee. I am Prison Officer 2, Jason Acqui. I'm in charge of the sports department at the Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center.
Thank you. The Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Siewnarine-Geelalsingh. I'm a clinical psychologist and also the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists.
Thank you. And from the University of the West Indies.
Thank you and good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Dr. Melissa Neptune-Figaro, lecturer and criminologist at the University of the West Indies Behavioral Department.
Okay, thank you everyone for those introductions. Can I ask now the committee members to introduce ourselves? I am Senator Dr. Desiree Murray, and I'm chairman of the Joint Select Committee on Public Services and Social Services and Public Administration. I beg your pardon. Can we now ask the other members to introduce themselves, starting with the Vice Chairman?
Hi, I'm Khadijah Ameen, member of the committee.
The next would be Dr. Dowlath.
Michael Dowlath, member of the committee.
Senator Nakhid.
Good morning to everyone. Thanks for being here.
Minister Ratiram.
Good morning, everyone. Ravi Ratiram, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you. Member de Nobriga.
Good morning, all. I'm Symon de Nobriga, member.
And Senator Roberts-Radgman.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time. Melanie Roberts-Radgman, member.
Thank you all. The objectives of this inquiry are 4 in number. The first objective is to examine the design and administration of existing state-supported youth sporting programs, projects, and initiatives known as youth sporting activities in Trinidad and Tobago. The second objective is to examine participation rates of vulnerable youths in different state-supported youth sporting activities across Trinidad and Tobago, including factors influencing their engagement and retention. The third objective is to evaluate the effectiveness of existing state-supported youth sporting activities in positively influencing the behavior, attitudes, and social development of vulnerable youths. And the fourth objective is to understand the issues and challenges adversely affecting state-supported youth sporting activities. I'd now like to invite brief opening remarks from the chief representative of each organization present, and I would respectfully ask that you restrict these remarks to 1 minute. Can we please start with the Tobago House of Assembly?
Madam Chair and honorable members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee. During the period under review, the Sport Department of the Tobago House of Assembly operated within a broad sport for all and positive youth development framework. The focus was on structured engagement, access, mentorship, and inclusive participation. While these interventions strengthened protective social factors, the division did not at that time implement a result-oriented framework specifically designed to measure sport as a direct crime reduction mechanism. Madam Chair, we acknowledge that participation data alone cannot establish causal impact on delinquency outcome. Since then, however, under the Strategic Development Planning Pathway 2025 to 2045, which is the integrated planning and decision-making framework guiding Tobago's ambition to become the greatest little island on the planet, the THA has transitioned to a result-based management approach, with pilot implementation commencing this fiscal. Systems are now being established to align program design with measurable social outcomes, to strengthen monitoring and evaluation, and to improve policy to performance accountability in a manner that is responsive to the problems faced by all persons in Tobago. Madam Chair, we are prepared to address the committee's question and to provide clarification on both the historical approach and the reform currently underway, with clarity and institutional transparency. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that opening statement. I'd now like to invite a representative from the Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center to bring brief opening remarks. Commissioner.
Good morning again, Madam Chair and the committee. Historically, the management of juvenile offenders, young persons who run afoul of the law, has fallen to the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service. In 2015, with the change of legislation and the coming into being of the Children's Authority, this jurisdiction has run parallel with the Children's Authority, the court, and of course the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service. The day-to-day management of the young persons who come into our jurisdiction fall to the prison service, and sport is a key aspect of our correctional educational program. So the prison service is keen to assist the committee with whatever deliberations in relation to the 4 areas of concern, and we are prepared to assist, as I said, with respect to whatever information the prison service could provide insofar as the management of young offenders within our YTRC is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Next, could I ask Dr. Kerry Dalloway, Assistant Professor at the Center of Kinesiology, to make a brief statement on behalf of the University of Trinidad and Tobago.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this very important inquiry. As we all know, youth sport in Trinidad and Tobago holds significant promise, not only in the realm of recreation, but as a means for structured developmental and social intervention. So we know there's a lot of research out there that shows how important it is in our aspect. However, we must note, and we and our department notes that, you know, potential alone doesn't have the impact that we would need. So therefore, we at the Center for Kinesiology, Physical Education and Sport, we have the expertise in research design, program evaluation, and data systems, and we are ready to support national evidence or efforts, in building frameworks in order for us to monitor and evaluate many of our sporting programs. And we are poised and we are ready to contribute to this committee's deliberations, and we are very happy that we have also gotten the opportunity to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we have a lot of questions on monitoring and evaluations. I look forward to your input. Can I then ask Dr. Melissa Neptune-Figaro to speak on behalf of the University of the West Indies? Opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we know that sport programs can contribute to crime and delinquency prevention and reduction. So the discussion today, I'm hoping to contribute some of the evidence that I have researched regarding how sports does reduce some levels of delinquency, but not only to talk about the positives, but talk about the challenges that might be encountered in trying to build those positive relationships within those communities with sports. And so talking about well-designed programs and how safe spaces and discipline and even proper supervision can redirect youth in terms of using sports in high-risk environments. So hopefully I could contribute in the context of what matters, how we could look at it from different angles, and what research shows on the topic of sports, the use of sports in crime and delinquency reduction in a lot of our communities, and how we could actually design those programs.
Thank you so much. Yes, we look forward to hearing all about program design and how our programs can be improved. And finally, Ms. Victoria Siewnarine-Geelalsingh from the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists.
Good morning again, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to contribute to this very vital national inquiry. So one of the things that we looked at when we looked at your 4 questions was that there is a distinction between sports and sporting programs, and they have a very different way in which they impact youth and how that youth progresses and how that youth develops their sense of identity. We are very dedicated to working alongside you. Certainly a multidisciplinary approach to these things when we're looking at national policy and how things affect our economy and our nation greater scheme. We really do need persons from different walks and different professions. So we are very intrigued and excited to work alongside you. And from a psychological standpoint, you know, it's not merely physical activity when we look at sports. Again, distinguishing it from a sporting program, it is in itself a very powerful developmental ecosystem. And one of the things that we would like to input is how we can take the benefits from sporting itself, because there's no debate that sporting activities do improve a person's psychological well-being, but we want to be able to take the benefits from that and fully be able to translate it into the sporting programs that currently exist and maybe ones that will be developed in the future.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone. Before we begin, I'd just like to apprise everyone of the format that the hearing will take. As you can see, we have a wealth of expertise that has joined us today, and we would like everyone to have the opportunity to contribute. However, we are constrained by time to approximately 2 hours for this hearing. So as a result, we would like to pose questions to each of the representatives and give them sufficient time to air their views. So we would like to start with the YTRC, which is the Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center, and give the commissioners sufficient time to discuss the issues that are specific to that facility. After that, we would like to hear from the experts in kinesiology, psychology, and criminology, and also the sports scientist. And rounding up, we would like to pose questions to the Tobago House of Assembly. So I trust that everyone is in agreement with that, because this will maximize the expertise that we have. Just some house rules. I'd just like to remind the committee members and the officials to please direct your questions and concerns through the chair, and we can now proceed with the hearing. My first question to the Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center. Your submission noted that while the YTRC does not fall under state-supported youth sporting programs in the conventional sense, given the absence of a direct administrative or funding relationship within the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, it can still be linked indirectly to the state. YTRC operates under the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service. So my question is, has the YTRC engaged in any formal or informal discussions with the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs regarding the establishment of a direct funding or partnership arrangement to support youth sporting programs?
Good morning again, Madam Chair. The straight answer to that question is no. As we would have indicated in our submissions, the YTRC, the sporting programs that we engage at the YTRC fall under the general rubric of the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service as a whole. So that funding that is provided across all the various votes that make up the resources that come to the prison service, some of that is diverted to the YTRC in the context of the management of young persons and understanding their interests. So that when we put up, for instance, for the purchase of the vote that allocates funds for equipment for inmates, some of that will generally find its way into the YTRC facility for use by the officers there in the management of the juvenile offenders. But there is no specific or dedicated relationship between the Ministry of Sports per se and the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service insofar as the management of sporting activities or sporting programs at the YTRC at this time. And of course, we look forward to the deliberations at this level, because this then allows perhaps a gap that has been operating to come to the attention of this committee and of course the national community and the Ministry of Sports by extension And certainly we looked at that as an opportunity for us to engage in that programming with the Ministry of Sports to enhance the delivery of sporting services to the young persons at the YTRC. We take the position, however, notwithstanding that gap, that we have been engaging with non-governmental organizations, with private sector, and of course, as I said, with government resources as they flow across the general prison system to engage our young persons who are at the YTRC in this in the important area of sport. As a matter of just numbers, we started off today at the YTRC with 48 young men and 13 young persons under the age of 18. Those are the persons who classify as persons who are entitled to be at the Child Rehabilitation Center, which the Youth Transformation Rehabilitation Center is designated as.
Yes, thank you. So I hear what you're saying about resource constraints and your efforts to improve the resources that are available, to increase the resources. I believe Minister Ratiram wanted to follow up with questions about these resources and operational constraints.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And good morning, everyone. The members of the YTRC, in your submission in question 1, that's on page 2 there, your submission outlined the various sporting programs currently offered at the basic level and noted that rugby and track and field have experienced reduced activity due to operational and resource constraints. Can you elaborate on these operational and resource constraints and what measures have been undertaken to address these operational and resource constraints, please?
Good morning again, Madam Chair and Dr. Ratiram. This has been because the reason for this limited activity, first to begin, we have our coaches who are not available at this point, as well as we have residents who, with this designated schedule, other programs happening at the same time we would have scheduled for these particular sports. So it's not that they are not participating in the sports per se. However, because of the scheduling of programs, all of the residents assigned to the sports might not be able to participate at the designated time.
Okay, understand. Thank you. And just following up on that, those programs, are there any plans to expand the current list of sporting programs that you have listed there offered at the center? And if so, if you could kindly indicate the proposed areas and the expected timelines and the resource requirements for those expansion.
Yes. As mentioned by the commissioner earlier, we have just 48 residents, male residents, and 13 females. As it is right now, we don't plan to expand on the sports. However, because since they're all engaged in these sports already, we are willing, however, to look at persons who are willing to come and offer different activities to the residents. But as it is right now, they are all engaged. Regarding the constraints, we have reached out, as the commissioner said, to NGOs and private sector to aid in getting the relevant equipment for the sports. However, we could always do it more. So we are thankful for what could come out of this engagement here today regarding provision of more equipment for our department. Thank you.
And if I might add, member, the challenge, because of the numbers and I heard one of the persons to speak about the concept of sporting activity, distinction between sporting activity and sporting programs. When we are speaking about team sport, for instance, football, with the 48 persons, you have to have at least 11 players to have a team in terms of the football, and then of course to have substitutes. So with the small number of persons at the facility, it becomes a challenge. Of course, when we are operating at our planning horizon, we take the position because persons come and go out of the facility. So even though the numbers today might be 48, we could have an increase in that number or a fall in that number according to circumstances. So we do our planning around perhaps developing teams at the facility. However, it is often a challenge. Then, of course, when we factor in discipline among the young persons and the disciplinary regime, then we also catering for technical vocational programs to build skill capacity, the ability to earn economically. Then, of course, we speak on moral and cognitive programming. And then there is a school that operates at the YTRC. So on any given day, there is a challenge for the time and with the young persons. So that is one of the key factors that inhibits the expansion of sports in the way that when we're speaking about sports at the level of programs rather than activities.
So, Chair, I would want to move, following up from that, in terms of the capacity and the resource challenges as it relates to the recreational programs, not specifically the activity, but in your submission, which would be on page 4, the response here to question 4, it would have indicated that sports and recreation at the YTRC fall under the training department, and that while the structure provides basic administrative oversight, capacity and resourcing remains an ongoing challenge. Can you elaborate on the specific capacity and resourcing challenges affecting the delivery and the oversight of the sports and recreation programs? We're looking at the specific capacity and resource challenges.
Okay, so for example, we have the boxing program at the YTRC. We look at the residents involved in that program, and we think we see that while we are engaged, while they're engaged, while they're in training, the residents there are involved in YTEP. Some of them are involved in the YTEP program. So they are unable in the scheduling for this period of the while YTEP is going to participate in the training program. Right? Yeah. As well as when we look at equipment, we have had equipment given to us by the Trinidad and Tobago Boxing Association, to which YTRC is a member of. We have equipment that is dated now, and that is something that we really required to keep the program at a certain standard. We would have had persons coming out of that program who would have represented at a national level, who would have been national champions, and we think that in order to keep the program going, we really do need the resources that are required.
So another way that we have tried to augment, for instance, as we spoke about the sport of football, we have representative teams at the level of the TTFA, the under-20 and the senior team. And we have been able, because of the skill of the boys, so we do not have a team, but we have several of those young boys who play representing the team with officers who are representing the prison service. And I could tell you, we are looking forward to at least one of those boys going on to perhaps national duties. Given the skill level that we have seen, the prison now is 4th place in the national competition, the TTFA highest competition. And this young player is making a significant contribution to that result. So where we can, we will continue to engage young persons, notwithstanding all that is taking place at the facility on a daily basis. but there is still a shortage of equipment. For instance, Pietro Akwi spoke about the boxing. We're speaking about the whole issue of supplements and the weightlifting that is required for persons to develop. All of these are equipment gaps that operate at the institution. We have in the football, in the context of the football, when we're dealing with issues of ice baths and the whole management of the individual after they play. All of these are things that we do not have at the facility readily in terms of equipment. So those are some of the gaps we refer to in the document that we provided. But we do well understand that when young persons are concerned in terms of their overall rehabilitation, sport is one of the best areas in terms of the successes we have seen historically at the institution. And that is why we are so enthusiastic about this engagement today, because anything that will bring resources to bear, even in terms of the quality of our coaches, having prison officers who engage in this activity exposed to improvements in their technical competence as coaches, that will redound to the benefit. And I wouldn't want the committee to not take the cognizance of this, that a single person succeeding in sport is a life that is generational possibilities, not just in terms of no harm and hurt to the public by that individual, but certainly becoming a productive citizen. And we take the position that young persons, because by nature of their ages, if someone gets into crime and criminal activity at a young age, if we are not able to stop that or reverse that, the time that they are going to have to commit harm and hurt to the public is significant, as opposed to someone who gets into crime at the adult level. So we at the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service take juvenile rehabilitation of juvenile offenders as a very important aspect of the reduction in crime and criminality across the country. And
That's excellent. We agree with you wholeheartedly.
Madam Chair. Madam
Yes.
Chair.
Yes, Senator Nakhid.
Based on the Commissioner's submission, I have a question through you. Commissioner, first of all, I had the pleasure of being invited to your graduation last year sometime. So I've seen the good work that you guys are doing. But given all that you have said and that you have posited here, I come back to the question, why hasn't the Ministry of Sport been approached to help you with those resource constraints, coaching constraints that you posited earlier? Why haven't you approached the Ministry of Sport for help in this regard?
Question of approaching the Ministry of Sport, again, we have had the Ministry of Sport involved at the YTRC in an incremental way. But in terms of, as I said, we always took the position that our votes that are available to the prison service as a whole, that is the approach that we have taken in terms of the rollout of sporting activities and equipment and what have you into the institution. So it has never really, and we recognize that as a significant gap based on, as I said, this conversation and having, responding to the questions that the committee had put to us, that this is a gap that, sometimes you're doing something the wrong way for a long time without realizing it. And of course, this is an opportunity to self-correct. And so certainly, we are going to be making the rapprochement with the Ministry of Sports to try to solve this situation and to get the resources into the institution. But we accept that this has been a faux pas for some time.
Okay, that's excellent. So at least it sounds as though we're going to have at least one success coming out of this inquiry. Senator Roberts-Radgman, I think you wanted to ask about the courts and the participation and the role of the courts.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. I didn't realize I was muted. You had noted in your submissions that the court did not approve participation in some external competitions. Can you indicate which sporting disciplines in particular has been most affected by these non-approvals? And did you get a reason for the decisions not to allow the external participation?
Right. All right, good morning, everyone. All right, let me begin by saying this, that every resident that needs to leave this institution must gain court approval, right? We have residents in Children's Court, all right? We have no issues in terms of getting approvals from Children's Court. However, we have residents who occupy that twilight zone between Children's Court, High Court, and Magistrates Court, all right? And we don't tend to get approvals or responses from those courts, all right? And this negatively impacts those residents who have to play sports like football, cricket, and basketball, because we have a lot of football competitions that require us to go to engage in external activities as well as basketball. So those are the two primary sporting activities that are affected. So our main challenges is getting court approval for those residents who hover between Children's Court, High Court, and the Magistrates Court.
So is there a way to fast track that approval?
Separate and apart from the fast tracking, the court will look at the community and the risk that is attendant given the individual, the young person. So that is also a factor that the court will consider in granting the approval.
What kind of mitigating circumstances do they usually look for? What kind of support would you need in order to get these approvals then? Recommendations, testimonials from persons, what? Or it's just a blanket disapproval, it just doesn't happen?
Right. Most times it's just a blanket disapproval, right? In very few instances, the court will ask us what security measures have we put in place. All right, but that is in very few instances.
Yeah. Okay, so there's nothing in terms of support. You haven't identified any sort of external support you could get in making these applications then?
Not at this time, but we are liaising with certain persons in the judiciary, all right, to have a meeting with them to engage in a way going forward on this matter.
Okay.
And I should add, remember, once the young person is to go outside of the facility, we have engagement with other agencies within the criminal justice.
That's what's trying to get at.
As well as persons within the community where they will be attending. So all of these are mitigating factors that we put in place. But of course, at the level of the court may simply be looking at the length of sentence if it's a child charge or if it is a child offender who is yet convicted. These are factors that the court will of course consider in the context of public safety if the person is to leave the institution.
And any involvement from the social workers?
When it comes to the legal matters, social work doesn't really play an integral part so much.
They don't get
it's a strictly legal matter.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. As we're on the topic of these challenges, Minister Ameen, did you want to ask anything about other challenges before we
Yes, I noted in your submission that you identified several factors. So the issue of the court raised by Dr. Radgman is one, but you also spoke of the students' lack of interest or aptitude in the structured sports that are available, and that you had limited disciplines. So you referred to recreational table tennis without a competitive pathway. And I wanted to ask, what strategies do the facilitators or coaches use to generate interest and to build foundational skills among the residents within the sporting disciplines that you have to deal with that, the whole issue of factors that discourage participants from being part of the sporting programs that you do have?
Before we go to the specifics, member, there is a factor that is operating because of the proliferation of gangs within the prison system. It is not a situation where young persons are in a vacuum and trying to improve their performance in any particular discipline. They're actually persons who are within the institution who would be members of those gangs, who would be acting against that. So in other words, even though the young person individually might be motivated to want to take part in sport, there could be other persons who are making noise if one could use that word, to try to prevent them or to not to discredit them in terms of that participation. Because of course the concept of gangs, that antisocial behavior and antisocial associations is a key component in terms of what we see as the criminogenic factors that cause young persons to engage in crime in the first place. So that is just the overarching environment upon which we are trying to build. And Mr. Aki will now speak about the specifics in terms of the question that you have raised.
Member, good morning. And just to complement what the commissioner said, I think that is one of the key factors in why there's a disinterest in persons pursuing sport even further, because we create all the avenues. As the commissioner would have mentioned, we have a young man who's currently on the Pro League, the Prison Service Pro League team. And, you know, we would encourage the other residents interested in football. Look, there's this pathway for success at this level. All you have to do is make that commitment, lend yourself to that. And we would see that they would be hesitant or reluctant to accepting that because of, as the commissioner would have said, that affiliation with the gangs, you know, so there's that disinterest. However, we do our best as a sports department. Yesterday, case in point, we were given the opportunity to participate in Tutu's Scholar Octalon yesterday at the Mount St. Benedict playfield. And we took a team of 7 residents, and we competed against the other schools from around the nation who were present, and we came out on top. So there's that, but even in that space at that time, our kids were not confident that they could come out on top. There's that doubt, there's that lack of confidence. And we had to motivate them and encourage them, listen, don't look at the other participants, just think about and believe in what you could do. And I think that's what we have to do as the officers or the persons in charge. We are the ones have to give that positive talk, give that encouraging word, and help. And that's how we motivate them into, you know, believing in themselves and their talent, because they are talented. They are talented, and we just have to do what we need to do in terms of motivating them.
Thank you so much.
If I may, Chair.
Sure.
If I may, it seems as though, because I asked about what strategies the facilitators and coaches use to generate that interest, and it seems that you are just relying on your own emotional intelligence to give these young people the, you know, encouragement and motivation. And I wanted to ask about the role of social workers, or if the officers like yourself, who are the leaders in these programs, get that type of training in terms of how to mold their minds away from, you know, the pressures, all the things that might discourage them from participating. Do you have specific training for that for yourselves, or do you have an assigned social worker or another person with that type of training?
Yes, please, member. We have the psychologist department that works at the facility. Each of the young person has an individual care plan based on their particular circumstances. And of course, we have also, in terms of our management of the young persons after sports at the level of the dormitories, because they congregate in a dormitory setting. So we have house masters system where an experienced prison officer to act as a father figure to engage in conversations related to issues they may be having. So there is psychological intervention, there is a level of social services, and there is a support structure in terms of the management at the facility for the young persons when they come away from sport in the afternoon, when they get back to the dormitory. And of course, nothing breeds success like success. That is a truism, even within the institution. So we use the young persons who are succeeding to be a role model for those who, especially when persons now coming to the institution at the reception stage, to try to have these persons have conversation with them as what is possible in terms of their development, and what is possible with sport is exponential. It's just simply getting the young persons to buy into that, using the structures that we have there. But also, as I said, a key gap would be the level of training for the coaches, because as member Ameen would have said quite rightly, that aspect where we have the psychological capability on behalf of the person who is actually the coach, because you could have a psychologist who is coming in who has no knowledge of the sport, and therefore they're coming at a generic level in terms of their psychological intervention. But if you have a coach who has that training, then obviously it would be something that works better in terms of what we're trying to do, which is to get more young persons to be motivated to take part in the sporting activities and to see the possibilities of this in terms of when they leave the institution and their lives as a whole.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. That leads us nicely into recidivism, and I thank you for your contribution. So we'd like to really now bring in the psychologists, and I believe that Member de Nobriga has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Before I get to the psychologists, I was wondering if I can just pose one last question to the representatives from the YTRC. And that is to deal with recidivism. And if there are any, because we have spoken about sport in terms of participation in sport, but are there any programs or are there any plans for certified training, so certifications for persons who are inside of your program to be able to utilize training, whether that comes from the Boxing Association, from the TTFA, from basketball, from any of the sporting bodies, to be able to be certified on how to be able, once they leave your program, to become contributing members of society, utilizing their own life experience.
Thank you, member. And just expound on the earlier conversation between member Nakhid and the commissioner. The Ministry of Sport would have offered a trainer course in aerobics for the residents. And with this certification, the residents could go out and find employment in gyms or even in their communities and train, do the aerobics as a form of employment, as a form of entrepreneurship. And I could tell you that the instructor, he was very big on life skills, and he was even showing them how lucrative this as simple as it seemed, how lucrative this opportunity could be for them. So yes, to answer your question, yes, there are programs that do provide them with opportunities to seek employment upon leaving the institution.
Thank you very much. And I do hope that there are plans to expand that even more, working with the different governing bodies and of course the ministries themselves. Chair, through you, I'm wondering, as we move on with this idea of recidivism, if we can move on as you have instructed, if we can move on to Ms. Siewnarine-Geelalsingh.
Yes, please.
What I would like to start off with is just a simple question of asking, particularly for young people who are or have been exposed to trauma, to violence, to stress, whether that is emotional, physical, mental, in sporting programs, how important, regardless of where that sporting program is the creation of emotionally supportive and psychologically safe spaces.
And to answer you more simply, I would say it is the most important thing. When we look at sporting programs, one of the major factors are what we would call pro-social adult relationships. And youths who are vulnerable, who are at risk of being involved in criminal activity, or even who are currently part of any gangs or anything like that, they tend to not have a healthy mirror. And so what a sporting program does is it gives them an opportunity to project more healthily. So there would be teammates who would act as siblings. There would be a coach who would act as someone like a father figure or some adult relationship that they can have a healthier interaction with. If I may, some of the things that would have come up while the commissioner was speaking are very real things that have to be acknowledged. It's certainly very difficult in dealing with these children. No two will ever present the same way. And what that means is in helping them or in trying to rehabilitate them, a sporting program that is standardized and that is designed to be a blanket for everyone will in each case have limitations. So what that means now is where the training comes in. And, you know, I did hear you ask about, I did hear questions about training. And I think that every single person who interacts with any one of these children should have a certain level of training. I don't think that we should say only the psychologists or the social workers should be trained. I think it's beneficial if also the officers have some level of training, if also the coaches have some level of training. And the reason why that's important is because many of these vulnerable youths would have come from an environment where consistency was not something that was there. They would make a decision to do something differently, but then they would not have the reinforcing factors or the support that would allow them to continue in that regard. And so where we have the opportunity with a sporting program, we can include within it elements of consistency, elements of sustainability, that training, the opportunities to have more healthy projections. And when I say projections, what I speak to are the opportunities that they may have to engage with an adult or with other people their age in a more healthy way with more healthy reactions. Now, it's very difficult if someone does not have training to be confronted with some of the types of behavior that they may have and to be able to manage your own reactions. That's why the training is very, very important.
Thank you very much. In your chair, through you again, in your response, you alluded to not just the programs themselves, but also the impact of external factors. Yeah. So family environment, peer influences. I suppose you could also include learning disabilities and sort of neurodevelopment issues, which may very well have created the situation that the young person may find themselves in. So one, well, you've spoken about how those, or maybe you want to elaborate a bit about how those also affect the effectiveness of these sporting programs, but also how do the persons who are engaged in carrying out the programs adapt to be able to account for this myriad of external factors?
Absolutely. So in my opening, I would have spoken about the difference between sports and sporting programs. Now, sports, everyone can agree that there is that advantage of the ability to maintain your emotions for self-regulation, both intentionally and to have the motivation to do it, even if you're unable to. Sport allows someone the ability of self-expression. So there are contact sports, for example, for persons who may be very angry, that a contact sport may be very helpful in allowing them a healthy space to explore and to express that emotion without hurting another individual or themselves. Sport also gives a person an identity. It allows them determination in learning that skill, the persistence, the diligence, and the perseverance that it takes to continue towards to achieving a task. Now, that is sports. That is not a sporting program. A sporting program is very difficult. A sporting program takes those elements, but it puts it in a space where there can be competition, which is unhelpful, where there can be the ability to fail. And now there's always an ability to fail, but when you put it in a group setting, it creates that comparison. And so what that does is it allows that person to not feel that sense of safety. And I heard the word safety mentioned before. So when you have persons unwilling to interact in certain programs, it's not necessarily that they don't want to, or it may not be the only reason that they don't want to because of the other persons involved. It has a lot to do with their sense of self. A lot of us, we are not aware for the unconscious of the unconscious motivations that drive our actions. So for a lot of them, they may feel a sense of not belonging in that environment. They may feel unwanted. They may feel as though they have a very low sense of self-worth. And that is probably the most important one, because a person who perceives a low sense of self-worth also perceives a low sense of self-competence, which alludes to a low sense of confidence. And if someone does not have that confidence that they may succeed at a task, even if they try, then their motivation is going to be a lot lower. And then that person now goes into a state of being defensive. What do I do if my motivation is so low and I think I can't succeed? Then that person may isolate or they may withdraw. Or if they do decide to play, then they may play defensively and not have that teamwork. So implementing a sporting program has to look at all of these individual things. And the one thing that allows a person to go from enjoying the benefits of sports into a sporting program is that pro-social adult relationship. But one cannot have that without having the training. And the training, again, needs to span across all persons who interact with these children so that there is a level of consistency. Without the consistency, then the negative self-talk takes over and ends up winning, per se, in the argument between, do I want to do the things that's really hard, that's going to cause me to become better in the future, or do I want to stay where I'm comfortable and where I'm safe?
Thank you. We're having a little bit of challenge with your audio, so I am maybe going to ask to move on and come back to you. And because we're talking about program design, so it's a good opportunity to ask the criminologists about program design and oversight. Senator Roberts-Radgman, did you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I
ask?
was actually going to ask if I could just segue into that, so that's perfect. In terms of taking it from a criminology perspective, what program design features do you imagine are necessary in order for the sporting interventions to function as effective crime prevention tools? And then I have another part to that, but let's start with that part.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Chair, and Senator. So what I'm thinking, and when I'm hearing the conversations, Ms. Dr. Geelalsingh, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, she talked about sporting and sporting programs. But then I also tap into sport as a recreation and then sport as like reduction for crime and delinquency, which I think is like a completely different type of intervention. So you have the recreational part where you do have those life coaches, you do have those positive influences, you are able to have mentorship, and you have the qualities that offer positivity in sport. But then when you start looking at specific factors, such as somebody who could be in sport, they be in sporting programs, but yet they still indulge in crime, regardless, right? And they might have the confidence, even when you talk about the psychology of it, and they have the confidence or they lack the confidence regardless with the competition and competitiveness of it. And that may kind of foster more criminality or delinquency. So you do have the positive side of it, but you do have other factors. And what I say when it comes to the design of a program, it cannot be sustainable with just sports alone, right? Because there are other factors that are very prominent within an individual or within a community or in an environment. You know, so we're talking about the YTRC, that might project more criminality rather than with just sports. So it does help on one end, but you do see significant context-related factors that would have to be considered and be challenging in reducing crime and delinquency. So one of the things I look at is like what is happening outside of the sporting environment. Is other people encouraging sport? What is the most prominent factor within those community or environment that projects that is much more prominent for the individual? So is it the gang? So for example, do we start to look at if gangs are influencing? Yes, they might be encouraging sport, but they influence in other types of behaviors. So it has to be a holistic approach, a holistic plan to how we're going to approach it. So we look at individual communities, environments, and see what is the overarching most prominent factor that leads to criminality. And so when you have people in sporting events, you have people within sport, is it really truly penetrating to help with the crime reduction? So we have to do a little bit of research into what are the key factors that are avoiding sport from being a productive element within those environments. But then we have to look at the behaviors that are attached to sport. Is it fostering positive behavior? Because sometimes the sporting personalities may actually be more advantageous to people in communities, bullying, taking money. So, and you see it a lot in a lot of communities where they feel like they are the opulence of the community. And so they demand respect and they demand a certain level of I would say they demand a certain level of respect and also encourage a lot of young people to follow suit in even positive and negative activity. So I think when designing it, you have to look at key factors within the environment, whether it be the gangs, whether it be that they don't have enough mentorship. So the mentorship could be sporting, but outside of the sporting activity, you have other negative mentorship or antisocial behaviors that are happening. They're still smoking, they're still indulging drugs, they're still indulging criminality. And so those factors that are outside of sports has to be tied into what is happening with these sporting programs so that it could facilitate better programming. The other thing I think, sorry, quickly, I would look at is just the supervision of these sports. Like, so who is, so you could have really good coaches, but at the end of the day, they leave these persons. So people who manage young persons' lives outside. So I remember I had the commissioner speaking about like they're trying to foster a certain type of individual. And in fostering an individual, yeah, you have the trainer, the training, but you don't really have the mentorship that comes outside of that sporting activity. So people who could be really good sporting role models would be better than just trainers, right? And so looking at them, their lifestyle and how they are successful. So after sports, what happens next, right? Is it that I'm just going to be in sports and be unemployed? Is it that I'm going to have money, financial stability, good social standing? And all of these things are very prominent in terms of designing a program. So it's a continuum. It's not just like looking at the snapshot of what sport does. What other factors are very much conducive or correlated with the sporting program and sporting activities.
Thank you so much. Just Dr. Ganpat, did you want to add anything? Did you want to jump in and add anything to that?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Just that any program that has to be designed to address juvenile delinquency must be built on the fundamental pillars of risks. What exactly are the risks facing some of these youths? And it must be designed to alleviate these risks. So whether it be at the community level, school level, familial level, peer pressure, all these different factors need to be considered. So it needs to be, if we are to give it a sort of concept or conceptualize it, it should be sport pedagogical framework. All right, we cannot, research is showing that sport without pedagogy does not alleviate violence in juveniles, right? Especially when you look at life course criminology from children from as early as 6 years old straight until 16, right? That progression, right, from delinquency, deviant behavior, straight up to adolescence into adulthood. So there must be that framework, or else it would be actually very weak in terms of addressing some of the root causes of criminality that manifest in the form of bullying. If we look at what is happening in our schools right now, the rampant school violence across different schools in the country, we are trying to see how we could address the root causes of those problems. And Chair, if I may, just to jump a bit quickly to a question that Senator Nakhid would have asked a few minutes ago. I think he would have asked the YTRC about their communication or any kind of reaching out with the Ministry of Sport. I would like to ask whether or not the YTRC would have ever considered or have ever considered reaching out to the police youth clubs. I looked at the meetings that you guys had before, and I did not see a representative from the police service to give that kind of information on the active involvement of the police youth clubs in some of these depressed communities throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And the reason I'm asking that, Chair, is simply because the criminal justice system, as we can all probably agree, is a very, very reactive system right now. It's more or less like a revolving door. And that is why the recidivism rates are so astronomically high, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but in different parts of the world. So the first point of entry is with the police, and then the last point is with the prison. And at some point, unfortunately, we have persons, because of challenges with reintegration back into society, may find themselves back in the hands of the police. So I'm asking that question to the YTRC Chair through you, whether or not they would have had any kind of collaborative arrangement with the police youth clubs, which I think is an integral part of alleviating juvenile delinquency in Trinidad and Tobago. I do think it is a primary focus in a lot of discussions on recidivism and juvenile delinquency. So Chair, through you, with the YTRC, be able to share any insight on that?
Certainly, Commissioner, do you mind just giving a brief comment, a minute or so?
Certainly, we don't mind. We are here to engage, Madam Chair. The prison service has used the police model. We have prison youth clubs across different communities in Trinidad and Tobago using that police youth group model. So we have engaged in that manner. The police youth club, I would say, they come to visit the YTRC from time to time, and they bring persons from those clubs to visit the institutions and to engage, so the persons could have visually to see where young persons who find themselves in challenges with the law, where they are, and they have conversations. So from time to time, we engage those tours by the police youth group members into the facility to visit and to see what is happening as an attempt to ensure, as part of our deterrence engagement. It is also the case that the prison service has an outreach program. We have a department that will, young persons and adult inmates will go to schools upon invitation by the principals. We will attend those schools with some young persons who are in the institution, also with some adult offenders, as part of that outreach to which Member Ganpat spoke to, as part of that holistic approach to deterrence and prevention. So yes, we have the prison youth groups as part, based on the model of the police youth group. We have several prison youth groups across the community. We also have an outreach program that allows persons who may be in the institution, who we feel have reached that level, to visit schools. And of course, we have schools on a daily basis, probably once or twice a week. Schools visit the YTRC as part of that, well, I would want to say shock therapy, a deterrence strategy, to come in and to see what is happening, so that the young persons and schools invite us as well for that outreach group to visit schools. And then, of course, the police youth group itself, they come from time to time to visit the facility. So that is the level of engagement. I do not know if that assists in the way that Member Ganpat spoke to.
Yes, thank you very much. So we are, I think we are talking about some of the challenges and sometimes the negative outcomes of some of these programs if they are not holistic. So, Senator Roberts-Radgman, did you want to ask about the live sport program?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting to, especially based on Mrs. Figaro's comments. And we don't have to speculate because we have an example, which was the live sport program, which sort of well, not sort of, very clearly indicated some governance failures in terms of the coordinators, so not just participants, but the coordinators themselves being involved in criminal activity. In terms of your comments about how we treat with the administration of these programs, we're picking your brain now. How do you imagine or how do you recommend that these programs should be designed and administrative, especially where the state is giving support? So we're giving state-supported youth sporting initiatives. How do we structure them to ensure that they are remaining aligned with evidence-based crime prevention while avoiding some of the governance failures that we saw in the administration of the live sport programs, so specific emphasis being on the persons administrating and coordinating these programs? What are your recommendations for dealing with those?
So I'm not really have expertise in terms of the governance, like so monitoring evaluation. But what I can say is that when you look at how the success of a lot of these programs in terms of using sports with reducing criminality, you look at some overarching bodies that tend to help with the monitoring process and evaluation, continuous evaluation. So when you look at if it escapes me, but Tariq, and he's looking at Tariq Reams, he looks at Jamaica. And they looked at the sporting activities of young persons, especially athletes, right? Because that is one of the most formidable types of sports and success in sports that you would see Jamaica kind of with Olympic runners, etc. And when he wrote about football and the athletes, they spoke about how they are well managed in terms of having overarching bodies, especially regional and external in terms of international bodies, to help come and govern the monitoring and evaluation of sports and how it could kind of move forward persons within from the level of just having them as a recreation to having them as a career value. So I think one of the things that we could look at, and as I said, I'm not an expert in the designing of these, but for the time of it working in terms of trying to reduce criminality, is kind of tailoring our culture, Trinidad and Tobago, our country and the communities themselves, tailored with those risk factors that we see. And we have to do a creative and extensive assessment of the risk factors. So why it will inhibit young persons in sport, or for them not to be successful in sport, and then align them with the protective factors, the things that will work out. So having somebody within the community that would be able to kind of garner and facilitate that type of mentality. You have a line of professionals such as the psychologists and even the persons within sport and sports managers to come in and try and give some of their professional input in understanding how to nurture those types of risk factors and protective factors. And you also have to bring in and align it with other sets of services. For example, the social support, like social development, have a lot of programs that can help foster some of the things that are happening with young persons. So what is happening within the home? So, the home is one thing, the environment is something, what is happening in schools, and then also their mental stability. And so that has to be a holistic design where you have a list of risk factors, as Dr. Ganpak spoke about, and then aligning them with what services are in line, you could put in place to help them with kind of overcoming those factors so that it does not impede them in the idea of reducing them through sport.
Thank you. Dr. Ganpat, did you want to add? You still there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to add a bit to what Dr. Figaro was talking about, any kind of multidisciplinary approach, which is something that is definitely needed, is always considered to be resource intensive. So that's why you will always have people talking about lack of resources. And I want to use this opportunity, Chair, to just share something very quickly. I was fortunate enough to speak to a member of the police service last week in preparation for this meeting today. Well, he has about 10 years experience with the police youth clubs in the South area. And they have been heavily involved in sports. They have been able to, based on his account, they have been able to divert a number of youths in rural areas, Princestown area, Moruga, and other rural areas, through playing chess, right? Teaching them strategic thinking, right? Football, cricket, even martial arts. And there are contemporary parallels with Trinidad and places like Germany, Portugal, Spain. Even Germany has active police youth clubs. So we can benchmark what we are doing here in Trinidad and Tobago and utilize the current infrastructure that we have. Given that the fact that Trinidad and Tobago and other countries going through a lot of economic turbulence, we need to focus on these police youth clubs. According to this guy, he's saying that if they were given more resources, they could do so much more. Right? They have persons who went through the system with the police youth club, and now they are police youth club captains. They are actually coaching and mentoring other people in these communities. So this is something that we need to take a microscopic look at, Chair, and whether or not we could really try to build it into a multidisciplinary system and see if at some point we could get some resources to assist these individuals. And one other thing, Chair, I was able to speak to Dr. Shada Maraj from the UNDP, and she has also been working with the police youth club since 2021, funding a lot of their projects, not too much with sports, but I was actually surprised to hear that a lot of these youths have been involved in beekeeping, right? They have learned about beekeeping, even hydroponics. Right? She said there are moves to actually get into the realm of sports with some of the youth clubs, but again, there are a lot of bureaucratic barriers that they need to break down in order to get to that point. Right? So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like the idea of chess because that's pretty low budget and it definitely fosters strategic thinking. So we're talking about barriers to participation and avoidance of participation. You alluded to the presence of gangs. Minister Ameen, did you want to ask anything about that?
I think the area was adequately covered.
Okay. Thank you. And Senator Nakhid, did you want to ask anything? All right.
Yes. I would like to go back to Roberts-Radgman, Senator Roberts-Radgman. This positing of live sport as a model for a lack of governance structure, I object to that. There was that is a program that had several dimensions, as Dr. Ganpat would have suggested. It was multifaceted, and there was a societal aspect, there was a developmental aspect, and there was a sporting aspect. Now it was a massive. It ended up being a massive program that was indeed resource intensive, and that is also always difficult to monitor and evaluate at all times. But
yeah, so we will, Senator Nakhid, we will be coming to monitor and evaluate.
Chair, I would like to finish. I would like to finish. I think this is important. This is important for the edification. You brought it up, and I think it's important that it's not just left alone.
Yeah, Senator Nakhid. Senator Nakhid, I just want to say something.
I would like to finish.
Yeah, let you finish.
After I'm finished. Can I finish my contribution?
I will let you.
I do not like the idea that live sport is being used as an example. Okay. You want to mute my mic?
Yes.
This is not a PLM convention here. I'm working on behalf of Kamla Prasad Bisasa. You cannot mute my mic. I would like to finish my contribution.
Mic,
if you mute my mic, I will come out of this committee. You cannot mute my mic.
Chair, I think in all fairness, you could just let the member finish his question.
Sure, as long as I'm very happy for him to finish his question, but I don't believe he's asking a question.
I am asking a question.
What I was going to say is that we have a reference of the final report of the Central Audit Committee on the comprehensive audit of the payment system of the live sport program. And that's the reference that we have. So we were referring to a specific reference. It's there. It was a report laid in Parliament on the 25th of July, 2014. So I just want him to know that it wasn't a personal statement from Senator Roberts-Radgman. And I wanted to put that in context before allowing him to finish his point, which he can now do.
Well, I'm giving some substance to that statement. I'm quite aware of what she posited. What I'm saying is that we have to be careful when we put all these things. For example, as I said before, that was a $400 million budget, resource intensive, and very, very difficult at the end to monitor and evaluate. Doesn't mean that there won't be mistakes made. However, there are also other programs in the interim that I have investigated that were also laden with government inefficiencies. So just to be careful, when you have a program, and this is for the edification of the public, you have a societal aspect, you have a developmental aspect, and you have a sporting aspect, which is exactly what live sport was. And you have other programs that have been advanced by different governments that does not involve all those aspects that are pretty easy to manage. So we have to be careful in our examination of these things and how we put it forward. And that's all I wanted to say to give some substance to that live sport remark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. I would ask as chair that if I intervene, that I'm respected. Thank you. Minister Ameen, did you want to ask anything further? If not, we can move on to monitoring and evaluation. I believe Minister Ratiram had a question.
Thank you, Chair. So to the folks there, from a sports science standpoint, state briefly the practical indicators which should be included in the monitoring and evaluation framework to assess participation, progression, and the overall program effectiveness. Yeah, what I'm looking for is if we could state briefly the practical indicators which should be included in the monitoring and evaluation framework to assess the participation, progress, and the overall program effectiveness, so that there can be, sufficient control, feedback, etc.
Would Dr. Rockcliffe be able to answer that question? On monitoring and evaluation.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair, to the Minister. I will answer the question, and hopefully you'll permit me to provide some context. So you would want to look at some indicators would be participation rates, perceptions of safety, developmental outcomes, inter alia. However, I believe it is important that we understand that indicators are based on objectives. And in my ideology on evaluation starts at the philosophy that informs the design of the program in the first place. And several contributors indicated this, stating that there's a difference between sport program and sport activities, etc., etc. So depending on the thing we are trying to target and the approach we are using, that will be indicative of what type of evaluation framework we are interested in using. I hope that is a sufficient answer, and I'm happy to follow up if required.
Dr. Dalloway, did you want to add anything?
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Chair. So in the whole dynamic of monitoring and evaluation, it also requires ongoing tracking of program inputs and also the activities. We need to know who is participating, how often they're participating, how the program is being delivered, and so on. Now, the evaluation of these programs will now assess if we are achieving those intended outcomes. So monitoring would tell us exactly what is happening, and evaluation will now explain to us if it is working. But as my colleague, Dr. Rockcliffe said earlier, here is where the objectives come in. We need to have objectives from the very beginning in order for a program to be designed and measured effectively. So when we go into things like retention and so on, if we don't measure retention, we cannot manage retention. So therefore, we need to put those things when we structure, build programs, and we go back to what Dr. Ganpat said about monitoring from the very beginning. We need to infuse this quite early and structure the programs with those monitoring and evaluation components very, very early and key.
Thank you. Do you have any link with the ministries regarding monitoring and evaluation through the University of Trinidad and Tobago or the University of the West Indies?
If I may, Chair, currently we are working with the Ministry of Tertiary Education and Skills Training, where we are developing, or where we have, developed a program that's being implemented in primary schools. It's a pilot, so we are in 12 primary schools across Trinidad and Tobago, and they are giving us the support in now measuring physical activity levels across these primary schools, which has some very concerning baseline data. But hopefully after the intervention, we are now able to scale up this program across many programs across Trinidad and Tobago. The program is being monitored and evaluated very closely. We gather data almost on a monthly basis. And at the end of it, which should be in November or December this year, we'll be able to provide a comprehensive report that would help us now go forward and understand how we as organizations within Trinidad and Tobago could now improve what we are doing. So our relationship, we try to maintain these relationships with key relationships with the ministries. We also have a nice relationship with the Ministry of Sport, where we work with many of the technocrats there to assist in our monitoring programs. Sadly, the ball has been dropped in some occasions where we were not included in the very beginning to guide the monitoring and evaluation aspect. So therefore, going forward in the future, hopefully we are able to start from the very beginning to change the outputs at the end.
Thank you. You mentioned about the lack of activity, I think you were alluding to in the younger children. Minister Dowlath, Dr. Dowlath, did you want to ask about the importance of including these movement skills and mobility in these programs?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Especially to, I think it will be Dr. Rockcliffe and Dr. Dalloway. We recognize that early injuries prevent youths from further participation in sports. And so particularly for the youths, and I know that program you're talking about with those 12 persons in our primary schools collecting the data, the baseline data, especially for the youths with low baseline fitness or limited prior sport exposure. How important is the inclusion of fundamental movement skills, mobility, and strength foundation in designing these sport programs?
Minister, if I may, thank you for your question. The question you asked is a very critical, very important one, and this is where my research interests lie. Biomechanical analyses has clearly shown where we in Trinidad and Tobago, we train some children, we put them in certain situations where we have not done pre-participation examinations and determine at what level these children are. And because we have not done that, the risk of injury has now become very high. So in that case, we have now lost many of our young charges because, one, these injuries are not maintained or managed properly. And then secondly, some of them do not have access to the services in order to manage injuries. This research that we conducted last year revealed that there are certain barriers to this injury prevention. And believe it or not, coach education was a major part. Another aspect was, again, the access to the services, and then early sport specialization. So some parents tend to now put children in a situation where they want them specializing very early without the proper foundation and without proper pre-participation examinations. And that being the case, we are now losing many of our future or potential athletes.
Thank you for that. And Chair, if I may follow up with two other questions. How does the presence or the absence of trained kinesiologists like yourself or movement specialists, as you indicated, how does that affect the long-term involvement of our youths in, as you indicated, in some of these specialized sports?
So the absence of kinesiologists and movement specialists, biomechanists, they are not there to determine or that baseline or look at the pre-participation examinations to see where those young athletes are lacking or may have certain body structures that may predispose them to certain type of injuries. That being the case, they continue training on these types of body structures or they have not put certain things in place to correct these abnormal movement patterns. And if they continue training with those abnormal movement patterns, they develop serious injuries and in some cases career-ending injuries. Quite sadly, many youths that we have talked to, interacted with, when we have gathered some data based on what has been happening, it always goes back to, one, they lacked that fundamental basic movement patterns, the physical literacy that is, and that now has translated into them having faulty movement patterns throughout their careers, which has now increased their chances of injuries.
One of the things that we're concerned about is, as you indicated, sometimes parents would involve their children in certain sporting activities that they create an excessive physical demand for the appropriate age level and for their experience in the particular sport. So there's an overload, and that may in itself result in the youths dropping out of these programs. In your experience, how does that affect participation rates of youths in sports programs?
Yeah, so those are one of the factors that affect retention, burnout. Many children, because their parents do that early or encourage that early sport specialization, which now would put a heavy burden on the amount of training that they do, in addition to schoolwork and so on, has now shown where the burnout is very, very real. I can give you a personal example. I evaluated a young man just the other day who was in tournament. While in tournament, his parents was encouraged him to run a 5K while he's training on a daily basis. And the young man was just telling me, I am done, I can't go anymore. And this is a 13-year-old, which has high promise. So sometimes we try to have conversations with parents to listen, maybe we can change the approach a little bit. But sadly, many of them do not want to listen, and they try to push the children in this direction. And because of that burnout, many students turn away. And we have reports where some students have told us, I hate the sport now, I do not enjoy it, which is quite concerning.
So, Chair, I have one more question. So there has to be some kind of balance in these sporting programs as you develop them, taking into the individual needs of the young person. But I want to move to another area. Some people say we're in a fast food generation. And so to what extent does inadequate nutrition affect the energy levels of our youths in terms of performance and also to sustain participation in sports over years to come?
Yeah. So nutrition is key to athletic performance. And if we do not feed the body properly or put the proper nutritional aspects in there, our athletes are going to break down very easily. And it happens. I have spoken to a coach who had quite concerning nutritional knowledge, where he used things like burgers and fries in order to give his athletes before they participate in an event. So proper education, especially for these persons, can help them understand our major food groups and how using them effectively can really help our athletes not only improve their performance, but also prevent injury and help them recover faster in some cases. So that underlying factor of nutrition, I think, utilizing or coach education and parent education would be key in helping those or save our youth participants, especially in this area or realm of nutrition and athletic performance.
And especially,
Thank you.
yes, thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Rockcliffe, before we go back to Dr. Geelalsingh?
Yes, Chair, I would. And I know in responding to Dr. Dowlath's question, I know he would have an appreciation as the Minister for Education that we can broaden the lens. It is important that we don't only think of the physical development and nutrition in the context of sport only. People are people before they're athletes, they're citizens. And when we narrow the lens, we see budgetary allocation restricted to the Ministry of Sport or the Ministry of Education. If we have more healthy citizens who are physically literate and well nutritioned, coming from the fundamental stages of primary school, early childhood education, we will have better citizens, and that will redound to reduce costs in other areas. And there's a plethora of research showing the savings resulting as a result of investment in programs of that sort. So that is one of the contributions I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to the Tobago House of Assembly, I think Mr. de Nobriga, did you want to just ask one or two more questions to Ms. Geelalsingh?
I did. Thank you very much. Yes. So through you, Dr. Rockcliffe, I believe Dr. Dalloway as well, did speak about indicators, especially when we're looking at monitoring and evaluation, and so did Dr. Neptune-Figaro. I just wanted, and I don't know if this would also apply to Dr. Neptune-Figaro as well, I just wanted to maybe expand and ask what are the indicators that should be prioritized when we are assessing the effectiveness of sporting programs, and if there are any specific psychological tools that you would recommend as well to measure those outcomes. And if I can just tack on to that, how would those indicators or the effects of those indicators be effectively monitored to be able to show an improvement from a starting position to a finishing position?
Thank you. So if I may be allowed to turn off my video so that you can hear me properly. Please.
Certainly. Thank you.
So I would agree with what was mentioned before in terms of we can only align monitoring and evaluation after we have come up with objectives. And to answer your questions, we would want to primarily look at personal development and life skills and how do we evaluate that. And the factors, the psychological factors would include things like self-esteem and confidence, discipline and focus, the ability to set realistic goals, and then also fostering resilience. Second to that, I would say social and emotional well-being improvements are another thing that we can look at. And within sporting programs, it's very important that we have a positive mentorship, and also a sense of belonging to community, which comes with the teamwork and the cooperation that we would expect. Falling also on the emotional well-being is anger management and emotional regulation. Now, in terms of psychological tools, the way this would have to be done is we would have to start at the very beginning of a person's introduction into a program, and there would need to be baseline measuring. There are psychological tools that can screen for anger, for anxiety, for depression, for suicidality, homicidality, a lot of these things that we see. And what those do is they give a number, so a baseline number. So for example, in depression, if you have a number of 35, then we will say, okay, you fall within the severe depression category. And retesting is normally done after intervention. So within a month to 6 weeks after of a person being engaged, and this is actively engaged in any sort of program, whether it is psychotherapy, whether it is exercise, whether it's musical instrument, or in this case, a sporting program, then we would be able to repeat those tests. And those tests work, they don't stand alone, they work along with others. So if I were to administer an anxiety inventory, and then I were to administer an anger management screener, then there would be things that I would expect if someone endorses something on anxiety, there would be a mirror of what that endorsement looks like on another screener. So then that's also a way for us to determine what the inconsistency may be related to. So it's very important when we look at monitoring and evaluating, it's very important that this comes at the start, so we have a baseline, and then also that throughout the program, we repeat the same test, so we use the same tools that we would have used so that they can be compared, so that the results of it can be compared. One of the reasons too for having it continue throughout the execution of the program and not just at the beginning and the end is because as a person engages in one thing, their coping strategies may be adjusted, or they may have different levels or intensities of relationships with the teammates, with the authorities, with the coaches, and with the program itself. Also, skill level will build. And so what you can actually find is that a person starts off in a very disadvantaged state. There is improvement, but then at the end of the program, they are again in a disadvantaged state. And so the continuous monitoring is going to allow us to see, okay, well, what changed? Is it that the coach who started the program left at week 6, and then there was a dip in this person's performance or this person's emotional resilience? So then that tells us that their need is aligned with the pro-social adult relationship. Is it that their best friend or the person that they identified most closely with left the institution? So then we can say, okay, that's a social relationship. And those kinds of investigations after you do continuous evaluation is also going to be able to identify what is the primary focus for that child, because as I mentioned, no two people manifest the same way. And so there are particular and specialized things that that person now would need added to their intervention.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the Tobago House of Assembly. Thank you. Senator Roberts-Radgman, did you want to kick off with the THA, so to speak?
Sure, thank you, Chair. Chair, through you, good morning again to the team from the THA. So I have 2 questions I wanted to get into. The first one has to do with the sport development program, where you mentioned in your report the district games, the sport camp, and the This Ability project. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this program, especially the various, I guess, sub-programs under this general program?
Hi, good morning. Do you all hear me clearly?
Yes, very clearly, thanks.
Right, I don't need to lean forward too much. So, Chairman, Madam Chairman, let me first state thank you for allowing us to be on this platform with such diverse group of interesting people who all have the common goal of utilizing sport for social development and positive social change. So with regards to the programs, the sport development program, what was listed there is the district games and the sport camp 2025 and disability. So what we have is sport camp. It evolves around the holistic approach of providing accessible sports at various venues across the island through multi-discipline. So we look at 11 to 14 disciplines where we have kids ranging from the age of 7 all the way up to 18. And this allows them to participate from a grassroots level in training and development of different sports. One of the key aspects of the sport camp that we focus on is allowing community coaches that are tied to various clubs and academies on the island. We allow them to take the lead in coaching and allowing the kids to train and have fun and so forth. What this allows as well is allows for a better retention rate of the program, because the goal of the sport camp is to provide grassroots level training. It's not for elite level training, but for allow kids from various ages and backgrounds to be able to learn sports that they may not have had the opportunity to learn. So we could get sports from football to archery to golf and all that is in between, all the mainstream sports to the non-mainstream sports. But the key, as I was trying to mention, is that we allow these community coaches to be part of the program. So this allows that when the sports camp is completed, it allows a transition from those who are interested in the camp or in the various sports to transition directly into the various clubs or the various academies. Because we are, as a state, we're not here to compete with the local sporting groups and sporting bodies. We are here to facilitate their growth and development. So that's one of the focuses of the sport camp. As it pertains to the district games, now district games is something that has been long-standing, and it evolves around competitions between the various districts in Tobago. And it allows for healthy competition, and it allows for talent identification. So we have two main forms of talent identification that we partake in, one being the sport camp at the very basic level, and then the district games that we plan to roll out this year as a second main level. From there, we're able to identify talented kids and then see how we can develop them further. The disability program is another approach that we look at sport. Now, as my colleagues here in the inquiry can all agree, sports is holistic development. So we try not to focus on keep a narrow-minded or myopic view on certain aspects of sport and certain persons. So one of the things with disability is focusing on kids or persons with disabilities, because that is a part of sport as well, and that is in keeping with the theme of inclusivity and allowing persons to participate. It must be mentioned that in the Tobago space, Akeem Stewart is a multi-Olympian, and he competes in the Paralympic Games, and to achieve that at any level, to be a multi-medalist, multi-Olympian is a significant feat and allows you to be the top 0.001% of athletes. So the disability program focuses on training and the capacity building and training of coaches to be able to handle and manage and treat kids with persons with disabilities, which would have been usually excluded from normal training programs, or who are not accommodated in your routine academies and so forth. So it allows us to tap into that market.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Did you want to ask about other vulnerable groups?
Yes, please, Chair, if through you. Thank you for your response to the first question. I also had a question around the Lalonde Gordon Fund. With respect to the fund, is there any special consideration being given to youth from at-risk or vulnerable communities? And if so, do you have specific instances, of course, not mentioning names or anything like that, but specific instances where we would have had at-risk or vulnerable youth being able to access the fund, either directly or indirectly?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, first, we would need to define what we look at risk youth and vulnerable youth. Our approach is multifaceted, and generally we don't label or marginalize kids by labeling them as at risk or vulnerable. In our space, the communities are very close-knit and intimate, so the relationship is much closer than what you may see or experience in Trinidad. So for us to marginalize or label certain kids as at risk or vulnerable, it tends to disenfranchise them, and they tend to keep away because, you don't want that sort of label. So that approach allows us to really accommodate all persons. So with the Lalon Gordon, with reference to the Lalon Gordon Fund, that is funding for what we will consider elite or high-performing athletes. So in particular, that doesn't discriminate against whether you're vulnerable or whether you're at risk, because we don't look at it from that perspective. We look at sports for all, and sports is catered for persons once you meritocracy, more or less. So that is how the Lalon Gordon Fund operates. And there are instances, of course, where persons who would have become from what you're traditionally labeling as at-risk communities or vulnerable communities that would have had access. And I'm sure everyone here can agree that generally the most talented individuals are the ones that derive from communities that may be underprivileged. And because of that, we again don't try to label as vulnerable or so forth, but they are persons who have access to the fund. And once you're a high-performing athlete in particular, this is your direction to receive funding.
All right, Chair, through you, just one last follow-up. Well, yeah, 1.5 last follow-up to that. Thank you. You would have mentioned that you don't necessarily use the label vulnerable at risk because you don't want to maybe create sections of young people or participants. But then you mentioned that you would have had participants coming from that group. So I guess my first question, or the half of a question, is how do you then, I don't want to say measure, but how do you then kind of know, just within the administration of the fund itself, just for yourself, so not a label being placed out there, but just within yourselves, how do you then know, all right, this participant is from an at-risk community or from a vulnerable community or someone who we may see as at risk or vulnerable? And very quickly to add to that, in terms of measuring the outcomes from the fund, can you just share with the committee some of the outcomes that have been achieved from this fund? So competition participation, maybe scholarships, or even athletes that would have gone on for employment in more professional roles?
Yeah, no problem. So just to clarify first, again, we don't really have a formal screening tool or a checkbox of what we consider vulnerable persons from certain communities. Again, with the Lalon Gordon, it's application based on performance. While we, off the record or informally, may acknowledge that certain communities may not be as privileged as other communities, generally speaking, we don't label them or we don't screen those kids that we deem at risk. And the second question you asked was, could you remind me?
Mike, yeah, sorry. Just the measurable outcomes. So if you can share with the committee, yeah, some of the achievements, competitions, that kind of thing, scholarships.
So from the Lalon Gordon Fund, we have their fund, again, high-performing athletes. And with regards to tennis, in the space of Tobago, we have 2 of the top Caribbean and Quotech regional tennis players in the youth category. We also have 1 of the top swimmers in the youth category as well, just to name a few. We also funded persons who are top performing footballers who get trials and screenings abroad, persons in rugby as well. But generally speaking, to qualify for the fund, of course, it's high performance. So you have to have a certain criteria and a certain level of competition that you are competing with or trying to achieve. So it's geared towards those specific athletes.
Thank you, Mr. Aberdeen. I wanted to ask, though, in your submission, you stated that there are sometimes repeated or more serious incidents that may result in formal warnings, temporary suspension, or engagement with parents or guardians with escalation to divisional supervisors where necessary. So I suppose what I'm asking is that would be what we would consider at risk, or sometimes we use the word high priority youths or communities. So we really want to address that issue. I don't want to ascribe a label to anybody, but we do have youth who demonstrate antisocial behavior. So are participants involved in repeated or more serious incidents referred to counseling services or other forms of psychosocial support as part of the intervention response, or is that considered that they would then be labeled in the community as undesirables?
Well, again, once sports is about discipline. So during an activity or a program that we're executing, let's say the sport camp, for example, if there are repeated instances of indiscipline exhibited by a athlete or a participant, we will have to treat with that accordingly. And I can say that we have never had such instances where there were violent outbursts or anything that required severe or serious intervention. But generally speaking, we would talk to the parents and then guide them along that process of social services if needed. However, we don't really have such instances.
So, but you mentioned in your submission that referrals may be made to youth development officers or social service agencies where additional psychosocial support is required. This is in your submission on page 17 in response to question 3. So I'm a bit perplexed as to how you're saying that you've never had such incidents.
We understand the question a bit better now, and I would refer to Ms. Gazon, who deals with that aspect.
Okay, good morning, Chair. Through you, I'd want to answer the question. The support systems, what was articulated in the response, that the chain of intervention exists. In the secondary schools, for instance, there is the student support services, which is part of the education system. So if such an incident happened from children within particular sectors, there are the linkages that are already established. So the first leg of the intervention is a parent consultation following the coach's intervention with the students. If there is an incident and it has to be escalated further, the Department of Youth Development, which is part of the Division of Youth Empowerment and Sport, has its own community youth officers who work within the various communities of Tobago, who may have much more individual contact with the social systems existing in the community that will provide support in working with the children. The next leg up from there is our Department of Social Services, which provides services like therapeutic counseling and so on if it is necessary. What Mr. Aberdeen was highlighting in the case particularly of the sport camp, they have not reached that level 3 of the intervention to have instances that he can directly relate to that have been referred through the channel at the level of either the youth officer's intervention or at the level of the social services intervention, but they do exist.
Thank you. So that leads me to ask whether these high priority youths are participating in the camps. If we have such disciplined children in the camps, are they really accessing the camps, the vulnerable youths that that this inquiry is trying to target? I mean, are there any monitoring and evaluation systems in place that can give us some hard data?
Chair, in response to that question, we indicated in our submission that currently and maybe historically, the monitoring and evaluation that is specifically towards evaluating behavior pattern and behavior outcomes was not a key element of how the sport department collected data. Because we are not identifying the vulnerabilities in the first instance and using an all-inclusive sport for all concept, there has not been any direct evaluation of participants in relation to their behavior outcomes and behavior activity. So we are not in a position to say so now. The systems that we are now adopting, which commencing this year, would allow us to as some of the earlier contributors related, in the design of the programs and the development of our monitoring and evaluation systems, those are now being embedded at the planning stages, so that the Department of Sport, for example, under our performance management systems that are now being introduced, will be required to set both quantitative and qualitative outcomes for each of their programs and their project deliverables, so that we would now, going forward, be in a better position to determine more specifically what are the targets, and not only in terms of participation levels, but in terms of behavioral outcomes of the participants of the program, and be better positioned to track those.
Thanks very much. So that has to do with the program design from the outset. So I hope that some of the contributions will assist in that regard. I just want to move on to a little bit about funding, because you need adequate funding in order to really design and implement these programs adequately. So did someone want to ask about funding? Or do you have any issues with funding? Because I see that the allocation has been decreasing, the budget allocation. So does that have any implications for your implementation or sustainability of your programs with the sports development program?
Yes, of course, with a decrease in allocation, you would have to.
We're having issue with the audio.
Hello? Testing. Yes. Hearing?
That's better, thanks.
Chair? Yes, Chair. So according to, of course, with the decrease in allocation would require some changes and strategic planning and more refinement for the delivery of programs for effectiveness. And yes, they would have provided challenges in the past, so we agree.
Which programs have been particularly impacted by the reduced funding?
Well, just for an example, the sport camp that took place 2024 we had approximately 576 children. Now the sport camp took place 2025. We had to reduce that to 362 children. So that took a direct impact. Generally speaking, and moving forward, as we get more releases, more funding, we'll be able to have a bigger and wider impact that has better outcomes.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Dowlath, did you want to ask about program coverage of the post-secondary youths?
Thank you very much, Chair. So to the THA, I noted on page 12 of your submission, you indicated there are currently no sporting programs implemented by the Department of Sports that are explicitly designed to target the post-secondary cohort. So my question is, have you conducted any needs assessment within the last 5 years to determine whether post-secondary youths in Tobago would benefit from targeted sporting interventions?
Thank you for your question, Doctor. Chair. So to answer the question, no, we haven't conducted that needs assessment, but before, I just want to reiterate and just go back to the response. So while we don't have any post-secondary design programs, we do have programs that target children in secondary schools. What our programs are designed is age groups or age brackets is how we design our programs. So, for example, we'll have a program for 14 to 17 years old, or the sport camp, for example, covers a wide range of kids or children or participants that would be included in secondary school. However, the design of our program
We've lost audio. I think I'm seeing they're frozen.
Internet.
Sorry, we lost audio for a few seconds.
Yeah, hearing now?
Could you repeat your last point? Yes, we're hearing now. Could you repeat your last point, please?
Yes, so our programs are not specifically tied to post-secondary schools, what we do with the design of our programs is cater for age groups. So, for example, they would have kids from 7 to 14, that would include both primary and secondary schools. We will have programs from 14 to 17, that would include secondary schools, sometimes primary schools. But generally speaking, we don't target post-secondary cohorts. Our programs are age appropriate, and we go according to age groups, because in sport, that's how we utilize and generalize things. We have under 14, under 16, under 18. So we go according to the age brackets. So that's why we'll see that we don't have a post-secondary designed program, but there are programs that will have participants from secondary schools.
Right. So, Chair, through you, I just want to indicate that it's after secondary school that you tend to lose our youths. And it would be very interesting if you could do some research there to see how we could make that connection so we could have lifelong involvement in sports. There's another question I want to ask, Chair. On page 13 of the response, there was an indication of participation barriers in sports. And it spoke about availability of parental or guardian support and other factors, transportation, etc. I want to ask the THA if there are any specific strategies that are currently in place to engage parents or guardians, well, beyond the secondary school, in consistent youth participation, in supporting consistent youth participation. Sometimes they're very interested during school, yes, but then after that, it drops off. And have you identified geographic areas where transportation barriers are significant in preventing attendance and retention of the youths in any of these sporting programs?
Chair, through you, I'll probably take the second part of the question first in relation to the transportation barriers. Most certainly in our rural communities, it's most significant, particularly where some of our facilities that will support specific types of sports may be centrally located. However, the division has been on a consistent path towards decentralizing and upgrading our rural facilities so that we can reduce this dependency of the transportation or the limitations of the current transportation network towards participation. So that has been one approach that we have used, but we recognize that it has been an issue for us in the past. In terms of the engagement of parents, that remains a challenge. And so with our data collection systems to properly evaluate that, we've not been able to develop a definite approach as yet. But one of the requirements under our current performance-driven focus is the conduct of baseline studies and the practice of baselining where things are at. So we expect that within the next 6 months to a year, several of our divisions, including our division of youth empowerment and sport, will be conducting baseline studies to help us to benchmark what is happening. And so it will better inform the strategies that we developed in our programming.
I just have one other question, just to follow up. For youths who are coming from low-income households, do you have any form of subsidy for their sporting equipment?
So, yes, from youth coming from low-income households, do you mean like directly if someone applies for funding for equipment and so forth?
Yes, in any particular sport, yes.
Yes, so we do provide equipment and funding for equipment to the sporting groups, sporting bodies, sporting organizations. And again, through the Lalon Gordon Fund, you can get access to equipment, access to transportation. Depends on your needs, but we do provide as much service as we could with regards to equipment.
Thank you.
Generally, we do it through the sporting bodies and the sporting groups, these clubs.
Thank you, because I do seem to remember Akeem Stewart on television lamenting about access to training facilities and stuff. Is that an issue?
Yes, that if I can recall a conversation, that is an issue with the National Stadium at the time, the Dwight York Stadium, sorry, in Tobago. The access to that stadium is in control by the sports company of Trinidad and Tobago, so we don't really have booking or scheduling authority with regards to that. But what we have done is significant. We have identified the need for having sporting facilities and access to high quality and high performing sports facilities. And that is why we have engaged to upgrade such facilities to make it more accessible. That includes in track and field and other sports as well.
So you have
Yeah.
been engaging the sport company of Trinidad and Tobago, because we had them on at I think the last or the time before, and they are happy to engage. Is this something that you would consider?
Of course. We met with them just over 2 weeks ago, where we had fruitful discussions with the secretary and the minister, and it's all about collaborating and making things happen. We share the same goals about using sport for development and development of sport. So it's all about collaborating and seeing how we can foster better relationships and utilize some of their resources to help benefit the island as well.
Yeah, because I think one of the things they were saying is some of the facilities are underutilized. Senator Roberts-Radgman, you had a question?
Yes, please, Chair. It's a follow-up to some of the responses we received in response to Minister Dowlath's question, and I think yours and mine as well. Anyone from the THA can answer. Outside of the age group considerations, what factors and other considerations guide the program design and developments as well as funding requests? And what are the intended outcomes of these programs then? Because you're saying it's not based on post-secondary school. It's not based on targeting at risk or vulnerable youth or community. So then what are the considerations that you use to to design your programs?
Right. Well, to design a program, we utilize the National Sport Policy, first and foremost. That speaks for sport for development and for development of sport. And then when we look at sports, it's a wide range and array. Sports is not something that is static, and there are varying levels and tiers of sport. So we have grassroots sport development, and then we have elite athlete development. And everything that falls in between that, we try to facilitate as well. So a lot of our programs when we talk about sport for all, it's for really introduction and for grassroots development of sport. Now, when we look at high-performing sport, that is where the financial assistance can come in to support organizations that are engaged in such activities, governing bodies that are engaged in increasing the level of sport as well. And then we speak to the fund that supports the athletes on the other end of the spectrum. But sport is something that, and I know my colleagues will agree as well, that it's diverse and it's always changing, and we have considerations such as burnout and these sort of things. But we must always acknowledge that in sport, the fundamental goal is not just to build an athlete, but to build a productive and functioning citizen of the country first and foremost. And my caveat of that is to have a hero such as Brian Charles Lara or Dwight York and these persons who can inspire millions and generations to come. Outside of that, there's the profession of sport. But between that, the goal of sport is to generate and build productive, disciplined citizens. And this is why we're having this conversation and how we can use sport to do such. So when it comes to the funding and when it comes to the access, we try to provide training and accessibility across a range, that spectrum of different opportunities.
Thank you. So I'll ask Senator Nakhid if he wants to ask the final question on the enrollment pathways and targeted outreach, which is what you're alluding to. Senator Nakhid, did you want to ask a question?
Yes. Given what you've said, I would like to go back a little bit to your allusion to you don't like to stigmatize. Of course, we understand that those at risk and so. But we have the reality. I mean, we can ignore reality, but we can't ignore the consequences of that reality. We have faced in a situation where our youth in those at-risk areas would not have access as somebody else. I mean, we see it not only in Trinidad, but we will see it in Tobago as well, where the young people will not be able to access the sports or the facilities for sport, whether it be not being able to have the transportation fees to be able to go to the training, not be able to get the equipment, and all of these things. So whether or not we want to stigmatize or marginalize or whatever, however we frame it, there are those realities that exist. How do you intend to overcome those realities that exist and bring more participation into the sport?
Hi, good morning. So one of the areas that, through you, Chair, one of the areas that we have looked to do that is to upgrade our facilities. I guess it's no secret that Tobago has quite a number of facilities per capita, probably one of the highest in the region. And what we're aiming to do now is really focus on not just the grassroots program, but strategically place upgrade facilities to allow for those who want to go to the higher performance or towards the elite training. Also, what we're doing is standardizing the way we do some of, at least the basics for the infrastructure to ensure that we can give the longevity to the athletes, making sure that we meet the standards and the minimum safety requirements so that it's safe for all to play. In funding the development programs, I know that emphasis is placed on ensuring that sporting clubs and the sporting associations have the necessary training to be able to give high quality training to the athletes in all communities, not just the main ones, but also in rural areas and those areas of high interest. So the approach has really been to decentralize our high performance facilities to rural areas and generally in all the districts of Tobago, as well as upgrading the training capacity of the clubs and organizations, forming those linkages with the national associations such as TTFA to mirror some of the things that are happening in Trinidad back to Tobago, so that the opportunity for the young persons, regardless of what community they're in or their socioeconomic situation, they will be allowed an equal opportunity to compete, to play, and to develop in all these in these areas.
Sure, I
Yeah,
don't mean
and
to
just to
I
add-
don't mean to interrupt. What I mean specifically, a young boy in an at-risk area, by all statistics, show that they will be nutrient deficient as compared to a boy coming out of a, let's say, a middle-class environment. That nutrient deficiency is a barrier itself to improve in development in sport. How can you address that?
With nutrient deficiencies, a very interesting question, and thank you for that question. With regards to our programs, what we do provide, I can state that we provide food and we generally provide refreshments and drinks for kids. Again, we try to aim to make it as accessible and as available as possible. And we do acknowledge that there will always be a circumstance or an outlier or someone who has been ignored or overlooked. And we continue to design our programs to ensure that it accommodates all needs. And one of these needs, again, as you mentioned, nutrition, it's our sports camps. We provide lunches for all kids. We provide drinks for all kids. We provide counseling and nutrition advice as well. So we do a lot to accommodate certain kids and certain participants, and we acknowledge that there will be some who may be left out, and we continue to work and to improve. And that is why the first focus is really to have accessible spaces in rural communities. And once we have those accessible spaces, the programming will be a lot easier and more spread and diverse across the island. And further to that, once we have these spaces, the kids create a more comfortable space for the kids or participants to attend, and we create a more holistic space, because we do acknowledge, and I know the psychologists as well had mentioned that there are a lot of the at-risk environment is what influences children, especially at a young age. And what we try to really do is develop the soft skills and the important skills, the connection, confidence, competency, teamwork, the leadership skills, and to hope that these kids can really self-actualize and develop to become athletes if they do so, if they choose to do so, or outstanding professional, responsible citizens.
Okay, thank you. That's a great note to end on. We just want to be sure that your programs don't disproportionately benefit already engaged youth rather than those who are most vulnerable. So I'm glad that you are going to take that into account when you're designing your programs, so that, as you say, nobody gets left out or overlooked or left behind, because they are the ones we're really trying to ensure have equity as opposed to equality, and that they also benefit from these programs. So I think that's a very good note to end on. It's now 12:46, and I believe that we've had really significant and valuable contributions from everyone. So this is coming to the end of the hearing, and I'd just like to invite very brief closing comments from all the chief officials present who did the opening comments as well. Starting with please the Tobago House of Assembly.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We want to thank you for the opportunity, for sharing, for contributing, and for the invitation of the Tobago House of Assembly to join in this very important conversation. Madam Chair, we are especially appreciative for the linkages that stakeholders exposure that you gave us, that we could partner with them, we could collaborate with them, so that we could get the best product for the development of the island. Thank you.
Thank you so much. University of Trinidad and Tobago.
Chair and members of the committee, I would like to thank you on behalf of the University of Trinidad and Tobago for the opportunity to contribute. And I must echo the sentiment that sport definitely has the potential as a serious social intervention, but we must measure it, and we must stop presuming, right? So once we strengthen these monitoring and evaluation frameworks, I think Trinidad and Tobago could move from just delivering sport activities to more developing, more measurable developmental outcomes. And I hope that we can share in that process moving forward. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. University of the West Indies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would just like to say that sport is in itself, and sporting programs is really not a standalone solution, especially when it comes to crime and delinquency, but it is a valuable tool. We're not negating how it could engage young persons and help with any sort of vulnerable population that we have within our presence. So I would just like to say in closing that once we have a well-designed program that is properly supported, and especially with the expertise within this room and experience of all those within these organizations, that we could actually focus on having a strategic way of using sports as a mechanism for crime prevention frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists.
Good afternoon again, everyone. On behalf of TTAP, we're very happy to have been part of this multidisciplinary discussion with all of the stakeholders here. And just to reiterate, that we would like to continue to work with everyone in this room towards the betterment of our youth in Trinidad and Tobago, which will be the subsequent betterment of our entire nation. And sport is a great way to use that. It is a tool that we have readily accessible, that all we need to do now is learn how to use it and how to apply it. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, the Youth Transformation and Rehabilitation Center.
Yes, Madam Chair, on behalf of the Prison Service, we are thankful to this Joint Select Committee on Social Service and Public Admin for the inquiry into issues related to sports, especially in our context at the YTRC. We are thankful because there was a particular gap that had been identified in terms of approaching the Ministry of Sports in terms of the resources that could be brought to bear. We certainly, as the acting commissioner, I give the committee assurance that we will certainly be writing to the Minister of Sports or the POMSEC, wherever the protocol will land us in terms of filling that gap. But we certainly want to give the public the assurance that sport in the past and going forward, sport has played a critical role in terms of transforming the lives of young persons, especially young persons who have already found themselves at risk in terms of the officially entering the criminal justice system. And so it is a proven fact that sport can make a difference. And it is a key aspect of our preventative strategy, not just in the context of what happens at the institution, but more so when the persons leave the institution, the extent to which their engagement in sports can lead to productive and safe lifestyles, not necessarily in terms of doing professionally well in sports alone from a technical vocational aspect, but certainly in terms of being productive citizens with discipline who can see the importance of teamwork and move them away from those criminal factors that cause them to commit crime as young persons in the first instance. So the Prison Service is thankful for the committee and its deliberations.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the officials of the organizations present for your attendance and contributions to today's proceedings. Thanks to the committee members for your support and participation, to the staff of the Office of the Parliament for your procedural research and fantastic logistical support, and to the viewing and listening audience. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.